Pharma was a depressed and overworked doctor who couch-kun iced to a fantasy world, giving him magical abilities. He used to heal a bunch of people while creating a harem of thick baddies. After dying from overwork, he opened his eyes to see a pink-haired beauty who probably won't be another Sakura. She called him Master Pharma, which made him sit up only for him to feel a brain-melting headache that had her begging him not to move since he was just struck by lightning. When he tried to talk, his voice was that of a kid, rather than a depressed, overworked adult he was supposed to be, and that's when he realized the weird shit going on. He noticed his tiny arms, hoping that was the only thing that shrunk and even fell when he got up. But still he struggled to the window, confirming a fantasy world that had him opening wider than my ex during Black Friday.
I don't think you have the facilities for that, big man.
He soon saw his face in a mirror and was amazed while his nanny wondered if the lightning fried his brain. He then asked who Pharma was, and she claimed his name was Pharma de Medicis. He wondered why his name sounded like a local chemist and also realized he must have died from overwork. Seeing that he was looking clueless, she decided to reintroduce herself as Charlotte or Lot since that was his kink. He then asked for the bandages to be removed, so she hurried away to make preparations. Surprisingly, his last writings were still on his arm, and for some reason, it cleaned off when he rubbed it. No, seriously, what was the point? While cleaning his body, Lot noticed a mark on his arm, and she looked amazed as she revealed it was the holy mark of the Panatheos. He tried to explain that it formed thanks to the lightning strike, but the lowly started praying and giving thanks to Panatheos. He thought she was referring to the god of chaos and fear, but she freaked out on him saying that Panatheos was a god of medicine. At that point, he decided to let her explain some basic knowledge to him around the house, like how his family was a great aristocratic house that has always been a royal pharmacist. She went on to say that his dad was an archduke and the president of the Imperial School of Pharmacy, which he found fascinating. She showed him a portrait of his dad, his wife, and his younger sister Blanche, as well as Master Pal, his elder brother who was overseas studying medicine. She adds that he and his brother are supposed to be elites of pharmacy, and the divine arts, which she goes on to excitedly explain, were miraculous feats made possible with magic. Seeing his confusion at the mention of magic, she looked at him visibly terrified as she hoped he hadn't forgotten what he learned all his life. She claimed that he could use divine arts of water, so he asked what would happen if he actually forgot, to which she told him he wouldn't be recognized as a noble and likely kicked out like trash. Later on in his room, the fear of being homeless made him brainstorm on how to regain his divine arts. Using Lot's vague instructions, he got a clear image of the composition of water, which caused his life to glow before a spiral of water popped out of both hands. He soon began to freak out as he couldn't make it stop, so he ran to the window and turned into a human hoss. When he finally made it stop, Lot called from the garden and said he made her wet.
I don't think you have the facilities for that, big man.
She, however, claimed his water was refreshing and felt wonderful, but he tried not to give in to his apparent thoughts. Back inside, he wondered how fascinating it was to conjure stuffs. So he tried conjuring different elements, which was a success. However, he couldn't conjure mixtures. He also learned that his left hand could create substances while his right hand took them away. When he heard Lot on the door, he removed everything he conjured before she came in, excitedly happy that he remembered his divine arts. She then asked about his medicinal knowledge and claimed he had to be extra careful since the Lord always springed up pop quizzes during meals. She then took him to a library where there were a buttload of books he had already memorized, but as he glanced through them, he realized they contained human knowledge of medicine from centuries ago. It was finally time for dinner, and he walked to the table while conscious of his family. Once seated, everyone took turns to ask about his condition, after which they went on like a normal magical family. As they went on, his dad asked how the georide bomb used to treat him was made, so he began listing the components detailedly up to process very accurately. His dad looked pleased and said he was glad the lightning didn't make him dumber than a stay. He then announced that he would be resuming lessons with Eleanor the following day. Unfortunately, the overaged Aqua immediately felt his 30 years old degenerate energy in a single glance. She claimed he wasn't adorable anymore, but he was more worried how she could be both visually and mentally impaired.
You idiot. You're honestly an idiot. I don't know what's wrong with you.
She said he normally calls her Elen since she was his personal tutor, and seeing that she won't shut up. He explained that the lightning strike was making his memories jumbled. She quickly asked if he recalled his divine arts, to which he said yes. So she decided to skip pharmacology and review the basics of divine arts. She said every aristocrat has a guardian deity and a divine art. For his dad and brother, it is Panatheos, while hers is Hydratheos. As usual, there have always been 5 attributes of divine arts, which are further subdivided into positive and negative. He noticed one attribute was called none, so she explained that none meant non-standard attributes, but claimed it hadn't been seen for over 300 years. He then asked what attribute could create any substance, and she said anyone who could do such a thing would either be a god or a monster. He couldn't freak out for long as they headed to a practice spot only for her to scold him for not having his wand on arrival. She had to explain that wands help amplify and control divine arts, and that's when he remembered the stick he mistook for an swapper in his room. She then gave him her big rod. Sus dog meme. She asked him to launch a spear or water, but he seemed to have forgotten how to. So she did a demonstration and yelled out an attack name like it was a freaking mid-anime. Pharma looked impressed, so she handed it to him to try on his own. He then stood by the lake and stretched a bit, after which he prepared the spell in his mind only for it to go out of proportion, forming what looked like a water dragon that just kept going until the wand fell off his hand. Elen, who was also blown away, said he was broken, so she began checking his malfunctioning body, as she claimed that divine arts weren't possible without incantations. She then realized that his total divine power that was supposed to be fixed might have changed, so she brought a wand for measuring and asked him to hold it. When he did, the gauge got full and even cracked while displaying a colorless capacity that made her freak out, as he had both positive and negative attributes. She also noticed his Panatheos mark and told him never to hold a measuring device in front of anyone, including his father. She then ended the lesson and started walking home. However, she couldn't see shit, so Pharma grabbed her trembling hand and led her back slowly. After resting a while, the situation was looking awkward, so to break the tension, he did a funny pose and asked her to do it anytime she didn't have her glasses on. She thought he was clowning, but she actually tried it and noticed she could see a lot better. Pharma was also trying it out, but noticed a glow in 2 places. He then grabbed her hand, which turned out to be injured, and when he asked how he knew, he said medical conditions glowed blue and turned white when he figured out the cause. This had her terrified, as she claimed only Panatheos' divine eye could do such a thing. She then retreated from him as it was beginning to feel like he wasn't human. And to make matters worse, she noticed he didn't have a shadow, which got her screaming as she begged for him to spare her life, promising not to tell anyone anything. He even tried to help her up, only for her to run away scared. The following day, his dad revealed to him that Elen had a high fever and decided to quit tutoring him. He was asked why, but there was no way Pharma was going to reveal he traumatized the poor woman with his superhuman feats. His dad, Bruno, then instructed him to deliver a portion and a letter to her. However, he later realized the potion was an energy drink and decided to prescribe an actual treatment for her. When he got to her house, Elen came in wearing full body armor while asking if he had come to silence her for knowing his secret. He had to show her he wasn't even carrying a wand before she calmed down and took off her helmet to hear him out. He then explained that Bruno asked him to deliver a letter along with a potion, but Elen thought it didn't make sense as she could easily make her own potion, so she assumed it was poison. He also handed her his prescription as well as a balm for her finger, but the traumatized simpleton still assumed they were all poisoned. This time he begged her to listen for once, as he wanted her to become his tutor again, but she said there was no need since he was the reincarnation of Panatheos. Pharma couldn't care less, but Ellen straight up knelt down like his servant, as though she was bound to do his bidding. She swore to keep his secret as she begged for her life in all honesty. However, Pharma turned on his Rizlord mode and said he needed her in his life. Of course, she read meanings to it, so he had to clarify that he needed her knowledge, not her body. He then revealed that she was the only one that could help him get his powers under control, since there were no written books about the divine arts in his family library. He said he wouldn't force her to consider his request, and then proceeded to bring out a banquet of flowers to thank her for her service. He then handed it to her before taking his leave, while urging her to try getting over him. Later that day, she couldn't use his drug since it was in powdered form and medicine hadn't advanced that much yet. It then dawned on her that Panatheos was a peaceful god, so she decided to take a positive attitude. The following day, she met up with Pharma still wearing armor just in case he decided to use her for target practice. She revealed she'd continue to tutor him. However, it would only be because she might be blamed for neglecting him if he eventually loses control of his powers. She also thanked him for the white powders that helped her recover and said it worked faster than Bruno's potions. To begin their training, they headed to an uninhabited island just to be safe, and there, they spent the entire day Bond-Sorry training. Back in the castle, Farms took his time learning how to use his divine eye by practicing it on the house helps. This allowed him to learn that the light disappears if permanent treatment is possible, but only deems if it could be managed. He also used the ion lot as he planned to make himself indispensable, just in case word gets out and they decide to burn a witch or two. He began making treatment for each illness, and using his special abilities allowed him to conjure some substances that would be hard to get a hold of in such an age. He went fast at work, forgetting himself like it was his previous life until he finished the balm for Lot's eczema. He immediately handed it to her, which got her so excited that she wanted to share it with everyone else. However, he said medicine was one thing people don't share before heading off to hand each staff a cure for their problems. When he asked Lot why the laundry woman cried upon receiving his gift, she explained that they never received gifts from their noble masters, which meant that it was a first. In addition, noble pharmacists weren't supposed to tend to commoners, but this got Pharma conflicted like it was any different in the real world. Still, he felt it was wrong and wanted to do something about it, like making a readily available medicine. The following morning during lunch, he encountered a cold room with gloomy faces as Bruno told him Blanche came down with chicken pox. This disturbed him as he knew the chicken merged with the pox wasn't because it was unfortunately not a Canadian delicacy. He wondered why a fantasy world would have chicken pox and thought Blanche stood a chance since she was still very young. Bruno then ordered everyone to stay away from Blanche for 3 weeks to avoid spreading the virus. However, Pharma was an exception since he previously got infected and was now probably immune. As Bruno prepared to head out, Pharma noticed him coughing but said nothing. He immediately headed to the laboratory and began preparing a chickenpox remedy. This particular substance needed was very tricky, so it took a while before the conjuring worked. He then went to Blanche's room with the little girl looking sick with all the little Oompa-Loompas on her face. She told him to go away, but he revealed he brought her medicine, which had her protesting since she hated bitter drugs like every typical kid. He then mixed it in macarons and had her eat it. But the smart ass recalled that Bruno said there was no cure for chicken pox. The idiot told her he found a cure in the library, but she countered him, asking how there could be a book in Bruno's library that he didn't know of.
You idiot! You're honestly an idiot! I don't know what's wrong with you!
Seeing that she was onto something, he simply said it was going to be their little secret, which got her to shut up. He also noticed her itchy, so he asked her not to spread the virus. But there wasn't a concept of virus in the world. Blanche wanted to learn more from him, so likened a virus to a ghost and ended up scaring her. As he stayed with her, she noted how he had gotten a lot nicer, and said it made her love him more, and he ended up remembering his sister from his previous life. Few days passed and Bruno was shocked to see Blanche had recovered quickly. When he asked if anything special happened, she said it was a secret. Later on in the lab, Pharma finally concluded he was abnormal even for an Ice Guy protagonist. Not only could he create things out of nothing, he was a walking MRI machine whose eyes could magnify things. To crown it all, he had no shadow, which was honestly spooky. He went ahead to casually invent a simple microscope, and as he praised his genius, the butler, whose name was probably Sebastian, summoned him to his dad's office. On getting there, Bruno told him to prepare his things as they were needed immediately by the Empress. Meanwhile, Bruno's cough was getting serious as he explained that the Empress's condition suddenly got serious. He wanted to use his divine eye, but couldn't, so he asked what was wrong with the Empress. However, Bruno said it was secret while urging him to get ready. At the castle, the head court physician, Claude, was pacing around when Bruno came in with Pharma. As they walked in, all aristocrats were in the room like it was a funeral. While Bruno greeted the Empress alongside Pharma, it turned out she was rather young and named Queen Elizabeth II. While Bruno did his thing, Pharma acted as his assistant while staying out of the way. He watched as Bruno took a sample of blood and used magic to examine it before meeting up with the other physicians to deliberate. He heard them talk about stars and how her life was coming to an end. However, Bruno still went on to create some numbing potions to get her so high she won't feel pain anymore. The Empress even begged him to tell the truth about her condition, but he claimed she stood a chance at survival before making her smoke pot. From everyone's actions, it was beginning to seem like they'd given up, and this got Pharma angry, so he used his divine eye to scan her, allowing him to ascertain that she had lung cancer, tuberculosis, and a bunch of sicknesses that made people very, very dead. As he thought of how the medicinal compound to treat her was so complex that conjuring it perfectly might be impossible, the prince rushed inside begging for his mom to get better. Seeing him only made everyone saddened as they couldn't do shit. However, Pharma summoned the courage and stepped forward. When he told the Empress to allow him to treat her with a new medicine, Bruno tried to stop his son from embarrassing the family, but the Empress stopped him. She claimed she felt that she could trust him thanks to her divine arts, so she gave him permission to treat her. He immediately shut himself in a lab and wrote down the 4 drugs to go hand in hand. As he conjured them one after the other using just his mind, Bruno broke in violently urging him to stop the madness, but he refused. He went on to say that tuberculosis didn't have a cure, and this shocked Pharma as Bruno could diagnose accurately without any special help. Bruno, on the other hand, still thought he was capping and would end up getting the Empress' hopes up. However, Pharma told him he had to take the drug too before turning to continue his work. At that point, he attacked Pharma from behind and was ready to make him stop using violence. Still, Pharma refused to stop, which made Bruno attack again, but this time he blocked the icicles before creating a thick wall of ice that separated the room in half. Bruno noticed he didn't use a wand or incantation, so he asked who the heck he was, but Pharma said nothing. He then noticed Pharma's notebook of new medicines, which he glanced at, so Pharma made up shit about seeing them in a dream when lightning struck him. The old man also noticed his holy mark and decided to attribute everything as a blessing from Panactheos, which made him surprisingly pleased. Pharma then asked him to take credit for the medicine he'd created to push his political ambitions, but Bruno refused, saying he must take responsibility for his words and live up to the Empress's expectations. On hearing these words, he undid the ice wall, which was another shocker, but he couldn't say anything as he watched the difference between the Pharma he knew before and the one before him. He dared to ask if he was really his son, and Pharma only said he thought of him as a father. He then returned to the crowd while covering his face like a sketchy surgeon. While he went to present the drug to the Empress, Claude asked Bruno to stop his insane son, only to be told that Pharma might have already surpassed them. Moving on, Pharma used his microscope to show the Empress the little creatures dancing inside her lungs. She in turn ordered Claude to see for himself, and everyone in the room took turns witnessing the new discovery. Pharma then explained that the organisms are called bacterias and how most illnesses were mostly caused by microorganisms. After his explanation, He added that he'd have to observe her every day for 6 months and even staked his life on the testament. He went ahead to drink his dosage before the Empress followed suit, after which he boldly declared that tuberculosis would no longer be an incurable disease. As they headed home in the carriage, the awkward silence made Bruno nostalgic as he recalled when Pharma was little and how he only treated him as a soon-to-be physician with no care about his normal life until the gods used him for target practice. Despite not being close to Pharma in the past, he knew instinctively that that wasn't his son. When they got down from the carriage, Pharma handed him the same medicine, and he accepted since it was the will of Panactheos. Pharma then went on about how he didn't know shit about being an actual pharmacist and was simply blessed with a cheat skill, so he wished Bruno would guide him for as long as possible, and they shook on it like gentlemen. 3 months passed that allowed Pharma and Bruno bond as pharmacists, allowing them to share their ideas and knowledge as equals. Bruno revealed that a renowned doctor had been inquiring about the cure for tuberculosis, but Pharma told him only he could make it at the moment. Bruno then said he already sent the man away since the cure was thanks to Panactheos and his divine arts. Pharma had to stop him there, revealing that he planned to make the recipe for the drug available in the future once he learns how to make it without magic. Bruno assumed he was being led by the will of Panactheos, and he just accepted it since that was the old man's soft spot. Bruno then added that his ways might seem like heresy, which would surely put his life in danger both from pharmacists and nobles. Moving on, he also told Pharma how they discovered the Empress might have been intentionally infected with her illness, but Pharma thought it was unlikely since the possibility of getting sick after exposure was 10%. Again, Bruno took his word as divine knowledge, and he too found a way to make himself scarce. Once he left, Bruno glimpsed over Pharma's detailed analysis, causing him to recall a heretic that almost ran mad from research. At the castle, he encountered Lord Noah, who drew him to the corner to reveal that the Empress was planning to reward him for saving her life. He asked if there was anything in particular he'd like, but man said he was cool. However, Noah wouldn't take such crap as he made him realize he was now a pretty big deal. He gave him the option of money or harems of cat-eared girls, but Pharma's head was totally blank. After much pressure, he said he'd like to open his own pharmacy that would be open to all classes of people, and Noah just stared at him stupidly since he just tossed away a blank check.
Emotional, damn it!
At the Empress's chambers, she told him his medicine was working since she was recovering fine. However, he said she shouldn't bank on the miraculous drugs as there could be sudden complications. She understood that he was simply telling her to be careful, so she teased him about how he boasted about the cure in front of the best physicians in the kingdom. She then went on about how everyone was planning her funeral after she broke down, and how her authority as a ruler wasn't paid attention to anymore. She thought she didn't deserve to rule again after being worthless and useless for a while. But Pharma disagreed, reminding her that her son Louis still needed her mother, and so did everyone in the kingdom. He somehow rizzed her into believing in herself, and as he left, he claimed that both he and her had come close to death once, so they should strive to live a more fulfilling life. Few months after, the Empress had gone from Lady Dread to a baddie who summoned Bruno and wrote him a letter. The following day, Bruno made Pharma accompany him while dressed like a proper noble. Pharma thought he was out of place, but he was reminded he is the son of an archduke. Once in the royal hall, the queen was introduced, after which she summoned Bruno to bestow a new territory rich in medicine herbs to him. Next, Pharma was called out, but the idiot thought it was a mistake. He then knelt down as he was promoted from an apprentice to an actual royal physician. As he looked confused, Bruno had to snap him back to reality. He was also handed a badge to make it official, and the Empress also permitted him to open a pharmacy in the royal capital. That afternoon, a bunch of engineers gathered at his house to ask for the specs of the pharmacy he wanted. Although he said he wasn't ready, they claimed he had to direct them immediately or it'll be off with their heads. Fortunately, Hélène showed up to help out, and this made him realize he had no choice. So he drew a blueprint he always had in mind. In a few months, the building was done and the chief engineer had to ask what name should be on the sign. They began brainstorming for suitable names, but the old man heard him thinking out loud and decided to go with Parallel World Pharmacy. When it was done, Hélène thought it was pretty nice, but he argued that it was all a miscommunication. She also claimed a mellow name won't stop the Pharmacist Guild from picking a fight with him, and as they talked, a constipated businessman showed up asking for the owner of the establishment. When Pharma said he was the owner, he introduced himself as Veron, the Pharmaceutist Guild Master, and Pharma. He proceeded to suggest that Pharma was going to sell candies given his age. But Pharma calmed Hélène and entertained Veron's provocations. He stylishly asked if his prices would be expensive, but Pharma said he planned to make drugs affordable, which had the constipated fool fuming. But then Hélène cut in and insulted the annoying, probably bald in the middle head punk until he vanished. When they went in to do a final check on the shop, Pharma discovered how there was no one to handle accounting. Lot then volunteered to do it, but Pharma wore a bland look since she was a kid. When he refused her request, she started crying as she begged him to allow her help out. He then promised to allow her run errands, an honor she took better than a Nobel Prize. When he arrived home later that evening, he noticed everyone tearing up as Cedric revealed he had been asked to retire. Everyone thought it was strange since he diligently handled the estate's finances. However, Cedric said the Lord was probably concerned for his failing knee. Pharma then promised to fix his knees if he'd work in his pharmacy, and they both agreed to it. He then went to discuss the situation with Bruno, who claimed he could do as pleased since he already sacked Cedric. Bruno also gifted him a chest full of gold to start his business, claiming he wanted to do something grand for his son. As he talked, Pharma realized that Bruno made Cedric available for him to hire, although everyone tried to avoid the subject, but he still thanked them for their thoughtfulness. Weeks passed, but Pharma's pharmacy was as empty as my heart was after the breakup. He wondered what he could do to improve the situation, but Hélène told him it was completely normal since the commoners usually shopped at local pharmacies while the nobles called the pharmacist home. Meanwhile, it seemed people were curious, however, no one wanted to step into the lion's den first. During a round table meeting with the staff, Pharma said he was more interested in helping commoners, but they were treating his establishment like it was a psych ward. Just then, Lot came in with some papers she called a survey she recently carried out with 100 townsfolk. She then began reading it like a formal report, which got everyone clapping for her. 50% of the responses said that the royal seal at the entrance terrified them. Another group claimed that they didn't know how to act around nobles, so they'd rather stay clear to avoid being punished for something ridiculous like breathing too loudly. Some said the knights at the entrance were terrifying, and lastly, some were skeptical about a child running an establishment. These looked like simple problems that'll be solved once the store gained some street cred, so they decided to re-strategize by updating their prizes at the show glass. That afternoon, Mr. Jean came to purchase some candies and used the opportunity to drink their mineral water. Of course, they didn't care and wished more people would visit like the old man. Pharma then asked if Jean was a sailor and tried to sell him some vitamin C candies to prevent scurvy. However, he found an excuse to leave the store. When Pharma followed him outside, he noticed Jean talking to some businessmen, and before he put one or two together, he noticed two traveling clowns who turned out to be his parents' poor excuse for a disguise. Once inside, his NPC mum said something other than ara ara, but he ignored her and asked why they were sneaking around. She said they just wanted to check how he was doing, and Bruno then requested for a tour of the place. He began by showing them the first floor that had goods on display as well as a lab and a waiting room. The next floor was an examination room and space for patients to chill. The third floor was a space for the workers to do basic things and had a kitchen, while the last floor was his personal research space to develop new drugs. After the tour, Bruno asked about customer traffic, noting that he saw a bunch of nobles but not a single commoner patronize him. He sadly revealed that he had no luck with commoners, so his mom suggested he add cosmetics to his products since it'll be an instant hit and probably attract commoners too, since ugly, insecure people are the easiest to manipulate.
Emotional, damn it!
Pharma thought about how he barely did anything cosmetics related in his previous life. However, he decided to give it a try and even asked what she'd suggest he go for. She said she'd like a skin product with some fragrance, but Bruno quickly cut in telling not to make white face powder. This got his wife nagging as she had been avoiding the white powder on his request. However, Bruno strongly believed ladies who used such dye quickly from his experience. Pharma was impressed by his observations since the white powder in question was usually made with lead and mercury chloride, which are all heavy metals toxic when absorbed into the body. Bruno added that the ladies in the city had even resulted in blood-letting just to get pale skin like a doll. This was total foolishness, and to make sure his naive wife didn't try such, he told her she was more beautiful than Beyonce, and this got the woman and her ugly hair blushing. Suddenly, a man rushed in looking for the person in charge as he reported that his lady had collapsed and was in a critical state. Immediately, Pharma took his leave and accompanied the young man to the site where they almost didn't let him through until they noticed his royal badge. Once inside the carriage, he met a pale-looking girl who looked like her last relationship did a number on her. He used his eyes to examine her entirely but couldn't find any sickness in her body. All he noticed was a few cuts on her veins which indicated bloodletting by a professional. He told her she was anemic thanks to draining herself of the much-needed blood her body craved. She argued that it was done by a professional. However, Pharma explained that the multiple cuts had also gotten infected, so she needed to be treated at his pharmacy. Once there, she went on about how her crush rejected her feelings because she wasn't pale enough, so she had to win his love by making herself pale. Despite almost dying, she still wanted to become a baby doll to be accepted. Pharma then prescribed some drugs for her to take and begged her to stop using white powder, but she said she'd never stop as she had to be desirable to men or she'd be as useless as an iPhone box to her family. Lot then urged Pharma to help the deluded girl, so he thought about an alternative and told her to return in a week's time. Few days later, Pharma tested a prototype on himself that made him look like a clown. However, the girls seemed to love the look. Hélène was more concerned about the safety of the product, but Pharma put her mind at ease, revealing that unlike mercury that was a little less toxic than my ex, his product had completely safe components. She then suggested they placed a ban on the white powder and Pharma said he already intended to talk to the Empress. The following week, the pale lady returned for her cosmetics, and honestly she needed it given her ugly face. Pharma went ahead to demonstrate how to use sunscreen and moisturizers to the dull girl. Hélène soon finished dolling her up, and she confessed that she had gone from a 3 to 9 over 10 baddie. She also shed tears of joy as she thanked Pharma for saving her from ugliness and anemia. The following day, Lot went out to market the new product to more ugly and insecure women who took interest immediately. Even an old crone wanted to try it out, but said she couldn't read. However, Lot gave her a visual manual for illiterates. Soon the pharmacy started booming, which meant that people cared more about their faces than their health. However, the next complaint was that Chloe had gotten ugly again since the new batch sold out before she could purchase for herself. Pharma had to apologize and claimed he didn't have enough workforce to meet the needs of a city full of insecure brats. To salvage the situation, she proposed he create a subsidiary with her family and would even finance and provide the manpower. He looked up to Cedric, who said it was a good deal for him, so he accepted the deal. In just a week, she had set up a cosmetic branch for him and employed more ugly women who would gladly slave away for a lifetime supply of cosmetics to hide their troll faces. Few weeks passed and Lot came to report her latest survey to the team. This time, the reports were friendlier in all aspects, and they celebrated themselves for getting past the first hurdle. Few days passed and Pharma's family took a vacation to inspect the new domain that the Empress rewarded Bruno a while back. Inside the mansion, Bruno applauded the caretaker for running things and demanded a full report of his activities, which he began listing immediately. This town was known as a prominent port that opened the empire to other nations while also serving as the top producers of medicinal herbs. The adults soon started talking about complicated business like tax evasion, and Bruno, who noticed Pharma's was useless there, told him to go out and play in the ocean. He then met up with Lot and Blanche, who had made an impressive sandcastle. Blanche wanted to play in the water, but he reminded them they can't swim, which got them all grumpy. However, they used their charm on him, explaining that it'll just be for a bit, and since he couldn't resist kids, he gave in to their demands.
What a fucking n***.
As they headed to hopefully not their demise, Pharma noticed Hélène chilling under a tree, but that's when she stood up and said she wanted to go for a swim too. She then took off her belt and started fooling around, which had Pharma hoping this wasn't a beach episode. She then asked if he was going to join in, but one glance at Blanche dampened his mood as she reminded him of his actual sister. He recalled how he used to play with his jovial sister on the beach and how she wanted to grow up so fast. However, the animators killed her off for character development.
What a fucking n***.
As the memories made him tear up, he heard the girls screaming as Blanche had been swept away by the waves. He immediately dived in without hesitation despite the current pulling Hélène back. However, Blanche was being pulled in so fast that she started drowning. As he watched her sink down, he screamed her name so much that his crest created a bright light that literally created an apartment in the middle of the ocean. Hélène soon woke up to Pharma as he held the water back while working slowly to the beach, and she could only watch in awe. Once things calmed down, Hélène asked what he did, and he said it was probably his negative water divine art at work. She, however, argued that the negative water attribute couldn't have annihilated water from an area down to the sand. He noticed Lot freaking out and was about to curse himself before Hélène told him he was incredible to be able to save Blanche on his own. Later that night, he recalled how he literally eliminated salt from the seafloor, which meant that was only lucky he didn't harm Blanche and Hélène. He noticed how Lot was hiding how terrified she was of him, and as she tried to talk to him, he quickly said he won't use his powers again, so she shouldn't be scared. On the contrary, said she wasn't scared, but rather astonished by his powers. She begged for forgiveness for not going after Blanche, which was her duty, but Pharma said it was expected since she couldn't swim. When he added that he considered her family, she broke down in joy before heading out. Elsewhere that night, reports reached the church about a boy who erased a part of the sea in a port town. Unfortunately, their information source was from an orphanage kid, and they almost dismissed the rumor until the priest added that they found an accumulation of divine power on the site some days after. On hearing this, the leader ordered everyone to find the child without a shadow who must be eliminated as a heretic. Back at the capital, business was in full throttle, even more than before, and Hélène jokingly warned him not to die from overwork. He also noticed some shady priests mumbling in the corner, so he went to ask what they wanted, only for them to give him a killer gaze before leaving. That afternoon, they talked about the shady men, and Lot reported that they didn't buy anything. Hélène added that their robes looked foreign, and Lot suggested they inform the guards to keep a lookout. That night, the knights at the pharmacy were just changing shifts when a loaded wagon charged through the front gate. When the news got to Bruno, he was incredibly pissed and promised to catch the perpetrators. After instructing the knight to report back to his station, Pharma was about to rush to the pharmacy when Bruno stopped him and asked if he had a suspect in mind. Pharma thought of Veron and the men in robes, but decided it'll be best not to do anything hasty. However, Bruno told him to stay vigilant. When Pharma arrived at the site, Cedric explained that although no one was injured, the carriage loaded with sediments did a number on the store, including the goods in front. Cedric then used his little divine arts to get rid of the putrid smell from the sediments. Later on, Cedric revealed they moved important drugs to their cosmetics branch where they'd operate until the damage was fixed. As they talked, Old Man Jean showed up with a bunch of gigachads to help him clean up. In town, everyone cheered Pharma up and assisted in any way they could. Few moments later, a girl came in looking troubled as she asked for Pharma. When he asked what was wrong, she claimed her dad passed out due to the heat and wasn't waking up. He didn't want to live, but everyone told him to go ahead, so he rode on a horse with the lady out of town. As they headed to the remote location, he thought about how he'd handle the case of dehydration. But before he realized where he was, the lady vanished and he was totally surrounded by the men in white robes. The leader then asked if he was the one that erased the sea while introducing his crew to be inquisitors from the Holy Kingdom. This had him remembering how Elen explained the importance of the temple, how they helped infants use divine arts, and also bestow aristocratic ranks to them. She added that the temple was responsible for choosing every nation's rulers, which meant that they were sitting at the pinnacle of power and could do anything. One group notorious for their power were the Inquisitors, whose duties were to eliminate evil spirits and heretics. He recalled her saying they were a band of unhinged elites, and when the leader introduced himself as Solomon from the Grand Temple, Pharma wore a serious face. They called him an evil spirit and asked him to pace backwards, which he did reluctantly, allowing them to activate a spell to bind him in place. However, it didn't take much resistance for the spell to come undone. Next, they surrounded him on horses, and one of them attacked with fire, so Pharma made a shield to protect himself before eliminating oxygen from the surrounding to put out the fire. The next shameless man attacked with swords of ice, which he also countered, and as he tried to calmly talk to them, Solomon ordered them to eliminate the overpowered freak. As he freaked out, they all rushed towards him as they simultaneously attacked from all angles. The attacks raised a lot of dust that soon cleared to reveal he had protected himself with an ice wall. He then pulled a Madara move by summoning a massive ice boulder, and as his body glowed brightly, he asked them to stop their attacks as he would rather use his powers for healing than fighting. Solomon soon noticed Panactheo's mark on him, and from the little feats Pharma pulled, he announced that he was the god Panactheos himself. Pharma was like, what the hell? But the dude went on about how he had already been dealt divine punishment since he sustained a serious injury when his horse fell. Bro decided to beg for forgiveness by offering his life, but as he moved to unlock his neck, Pharma stopped him at the last moment. He then scanned Solomon's leg and ascertained it would have to be amputated, but it glowed red, so he went for a reducing treatment and the glow disappeared, meaning it was the right option. However, the next problem was that he didn't know who could operate on the leg since he was a pharmacist. He thought of all the possibilities and arrived at a conclusion that he had to do it himself. He then conjured a stone bed out of nothing and made the priests set up a tent. Once that was done, he went into the tent to explain the procedure he was about to carry out. After gaining the permission of the patient, he got dressed and began by injecting the dude's spinal cord to administer anesthesia. Once he finished the procedure, the band of bullies treated him like a god, which he was, but he only asked one thing, that they keep whatever they saw a secret. One day, several months later, Solomon, now the new bishop, paid a visit to Pharma's pharmacy, even bringing candies like he was cosplaying for Halloween. Pharma had to ask how he went from the leader of a gang of bullies to a bishop, so he explained that he went through countless trials to make himself useful to him. This was basically him saying he'd devote his life to making sure Pharma's secret stayed hidden, but the poor boy was slightly terrified by his sus love. He also noticed a bunch of boys parading around, so Solomon took him to a room to present him with a wand known as the treasure of the guardian deity temple. He explained that the wand had all attributes, including healing, and could even change shape like the Monkey King's staff. Pharma thought he didn't deserve such a holy relic, but Solomon urged him to pick it up. Once he did, it glowed brightly and had everyone present in awe, including Elen, who Pharma tried to give only for the wand to phase through her. Solomon then explained that the wand was otherworldly, and therefore only otherworldly deities could hold it. When he grabbed it again, he asked Solomon if it could float, and he responded that there were records of the possibility. He actually tried it out, and it truly floated, which got Elen and Solomon excited. Before Solomon left, He promised Pharma that the temple would leave him be, but claimed the carriage incident wasn't their doing, so he still had enemies to deal with. He also handed Pharma a talisman to suppress his divine powers, and this brought back his shadow, making him more happy than when he received the wand. He then went to town with Blanche and Lot, and while they walked around town, he thought of how hiring more workers would be difficult. Just then, he heard a customer asking a pharmacy staff why they don't sell Pharma's products. The man then claimed the place sold strange medicines at rock-bottom prices, which was fishy. The boss also showed up and explained that the guild had to approve Pharma's products before they would be allowed to sell. Back at the shop, he thought of an idea to create a new guild since Veron was being a piece of trash. He hoped it'll all work out as he didn't want to overwork himself again, but Hélène thought it was just a funny joke. Meanwhile, at the Pharmacist Guild, the shameless bunch of old men were busy plotting how to sabotage Pharma after he recovered from their attack. Veron thought he probably cleared the sediments and renovated the place thanks to his divine arts or his dad's money. As he ranted on, some folks laughed at him, so he reminded them that Pharma was ruining business, so they had to handle him. He also banned all guild members from going close to the pharmacy or risk having their license seized. Later in town, a man was banging on a doctor's door while carrying his sick daughter. Fortunately, Pharma was passing by and introduced himself, but since he was a guild member, he didn't want to engage with Pharma. However, he changed his mind and accompanied Pharma to his pharmacy, who then led him through a side entrance, causing him to assume it was the commoner's passage. Once inside, he handed the man a nose mask, which made him realize Pharma was protecting his customers from his daughter's disease. He began by asking basic information like his daughter's name and age, what she ate, and more details that had him astonished. He also took their measurements since she was unconscious, and when the man asked the significance, Pharma explained that he needed it to allocate the right dosage. After a while, he also used his divine eye on the girl, which had the man curious. Pharma then revealed his daughter Marie was only suffering from a severe cold. The local pharmacist couldn't believe it since he witnessed a bunch of symptoms, but Pharma assured him it was actually a cold, but one caused by a virus. He didn't catch most of the words Pharma used, but understood his instructions to administer the drug through inhalation, and rather than swallowing. He then left them to rest a bit before leaving, and by evening, Marie's health had already improved. As he walked them home, he even promised to attend to her if the symptoms got worse. At the gate, the man was expecting an outrageous bill, but got shocked when Pharma said it was roughly the price of a big loaf of bread. Back at home, his wife got worried when she learned that he visited the parallel world pharmacy. However, he said he had no choice before going on to praise Pharma and how he genuinely cared about Marie. He confessed that as a pharmacist, if he could learn a few things from Pharma, it would help a lot, but that would mean going up against the guild. His wife reminded him of the debts from the shop he opened, but she realized his mind was already set, so she began to sob. During the next guild meeting, Veron revealed how he destroyed all the cosmetics his wife bought from Pharma, and the others even whispered how the bishop frequents the shop. Suddenly, Veron asked Pierre what he thought of the situation since his shop was closest to the Devil's Nest. Pierre then took a deep breath and spoke boldly, asking if anyone present had ever seen the medicine Pharma makes, and of course they said no. He added that they needed to see the competition with their eyes as he did. He confessed to seeking their help and claimed they treated everyone equally and cheaply. But Veron went nuts as he looked for excuses to label Pharma a devil incarnate. Soon he started spitting about how a noble neglected him in his time of need, claiming that their divine powers are limited, so he had to bury his child. Veron continued to push for Pharma to be eliminated one way or the other, but Pierre tried to convince everyone to learn from the competition instead of relying on flukes and vague knowledge. He was beginning to make sense until Veron shut him up and drove him away. That afternoon, Pharma stumbled on Pierre sitting in front of his vandalized shop as he explained how he stood up to the guild only to be punished as a result. He explained how he'd have to leave the country if he was to continue practicing pharmacy. but Pharma said he won't have to leave since he recently established a guild. He then invited Pierre to join his new guild, and the man was moved to tears by the turn of events. He soon set up his shop now with some of Pharma's products, and before he opened up, Marie encouraged him to give it his all, which he did, and was shocked to find a crowd of people waiting outside. Some years ago, a genius named Camus was arrested by the temple despite contributing greatly to the kingdom's medical growth. In his last moments, a young Bruno wanted to know why he performed human experiments, but the man went on about the circle of life and how people die and are born every day. As he tried to explain the significance of experimentation, Bruno woke up from the nightmare. During lunch, Pharma noticed he looked disturbed, so he asked what was wrong. However, Bruno decided not to bring up Camus during breakfast. Just then, a letter was brought in from Pal, his first son, and Bruno read that his visit home would be delayed, much to their mother's worry as she was excitedly expecting him. Lot and Blanche then went on about how Pal was a genius, and it was a no-brainer Pharma was incredible too. Immediately after, Pharma and Bruno went to the office where he reminded Pharma about the upcoming St. Flou Fair, a one-month event where merchants from around the world gather in the capital. He told Pharma to be careful, explaining that there had been reports of a strange epidemic that broke out on a neighboring country island. He claimed Pal's letter detailed how over 1,000 colonists were wiped out. This had Pharma worried as he wanted to know more details, but Bruno added that the research team that took samples also died recently, which meant that it was contagious. He then revealed that although the epidemic had ended, goods from the island were coming to the fair, so there was a possibility that the goods would be contaminated. To make matters worse, they had to be dropped off at the port in his new domain. The fact that everything about the epidemic was burnt to ash made Pharma scared since it was clearly unmanageable. In Pal's report, the first researcher developed high fever followed by vomiting and headache before growing lumps on his neck, after which he died on the 7th day. The second researcher died faster, but with different symptoms like skin turning black, and that's when they knew they were screwed. The symptoms had Pharma dreading the obvious, but he asked for more details, so Bruno read out how a new device was invented by an unknown individual, and the subject in question was Pharma and his microscope. It turned out researchers used his microscope and were able to get a view of the virus, so Pharma asked that Pal send in some sketches. Meanwhile, at the palace, a meeting was being held where they learned how the death rate in the kingdom had decreased by over 20% since Pharma established his pharmacy. Everyone all had good things to say about Pharma's influence in the kingdom, so the Empress thought it was wise to reward him for his role. She suggested making him an archduke, but Mary pointed out such a rank couldn't be given to a minor. While the meeting went on, the Empress thought about how Pharma was probably possessed by a being, and she wanted to find ways to help him act freely. Meanwhile, over at the pharmacy, Pharma explained the fatal disease outbreak to Hélène, who suggested they stop the fair. Lot also showed up carrying a letter from Pal, and as soon as he saw the sketch, he looked like he saw a ghost. From what he saw, it was something called Yersinia pestis. Immediately, he sent some personnel to the port town to prepare it for quarantine, and they promised to do their best. Once they left, Pharma and Hélène approached Bruno and said the epidemic was most likely the Black Death. Bruno already had the same thoughts after reading a few books, and Pharma recalled how it was known as the bubonic plague that had a 70% death rate in the 17th century. They explained the precautionary measures they'd already taken to prevent an outbreak. However, Bruno had to emphasize the Empire's doom if an outbreak was to occur, as there wasn't a way to fight the disease. Pharma then revealed that he had already made a new drug and had sent it out for packaging just in case. Although Bruno was impressed by his work rate, Pharma said they still had to prevent an outbreak since he is the only one that can make the drug. With that said, they reached out to the Empress to allow goods inspection at the capital gate. In addition, he asked that they eliminate the disease vectors, which are fleas and rats, so the Empress immediately moved to make his request possible. Bruno thanked her for listening to them and responding swiftly, but she said she absolutely trusts Pharma. Later that day, Pharma showed Pierre the compound microscope he made so they wouldn't have to get close to bacterias anymore. He also reported that the medicine he made had been packaged and distributed accordingly for free when needed. After making arrangements, he left the capital in Pierre's care. At the same time, the Empress was given a rundown of the preparation of the fair and how the checkpoints weren't obstructing their plans. Bishop Salomon had also dispatched priests in case purification was needed. She asked them to keep the matter of the epidemic hush, as their enemies might take advantage of the situation and create chaos. Meanwhile, Hélène and Pharma were about to head out, and when she noticed he was scared, he encouraged him by making him notice Lot rooting for him. On getting to the port town, they took a glance at the ships waiting to be inspected and how just one could destroy the nation's prosperity. They soon met up with the team they sent ahead, who reported that every ship was already anchored before handing them the documents from their inspection so far. They reported that even the ships who passed the inspection had their cargoes purified just in case. They also joined the inspection team and arrived on a boat that had an impatient merchant. They had to talk with the ship's physician who cooperated with them as they carried on their duties below deck. After inspection, Pharma didn't find issues with their cargo. However, he handed them some prescription and said their crew members were suffering from scurvy. As they moved to the next ship, the sailors started fighting for the next spot since they had already been delayed enough. The old men continued to throw baby tantrums, which got Hélène drawing her wand, only for them to be startled by cannon shots from the Empire's Scarlet Navy. It also turned out Old Man Jean was a freaking Navy commander. Mr. Jean then announced that Pharma was a royal pharmacist and the son of an archduke, which shocked the sailors, so he promised to sink any ship that insults Pharma. Pharma's team also met up with Mr. Jean, who simply wanted his shop's candy more than anything else. The crew claimed they stopped going down with scurvy ever since they started taking his candies, and Pharma was happy it helped them out. After their inspection, Hélène was still scared of the possibility of a Black Death outbreak, so she urged everyone to be diligent. Just then, Adam, the acting governor, came in to report that a bunch of people from Estac village were reported dead after showing symptoms of high fevers. The village was west of their location, and some sailors reportedly avoided the inspection and fled there illegally. He reported that the outbreak was spreading rapidly, so Pharma prepared to go there, much to Hélène's displeasure, but he made her understand the weight of the situation. Hélène tried to stop him, but he encouraged her to make herself useful instead of whining when she had adequate personnel and tools at her disposal. He then launched on his divine arts wand and flew away in haste. As he flew, he got lost in thoughts and collided with a bird which had him crashing down, but he stayed afloat before he crashed down. As he headed for a big tree, he shut his eyes in fear and somehow phased through it thanks to his wand's ability. When he got to the village, a bunch of villagers were leaving, and he asked them to stay behind. Of course, they told him to buzz off as they didn't want to die. They soon began to panic and labeled him the evil spirit that cursed them since he showed up out of thin air. As they drew their weapons on him, he used his wand to create a dome of ice around the village, and their jaws dropped faster than a hose skirt. He then explained that he planned on saving them as a royal pharmacist, and when they noticed his badge, they calmed down and asked him to save them. Once inside, he explained that the village will be split into 3 zones for the severely infected, mildly infected, and uninfected. The men thought he planned to burn the infected. However, he said it was simply a method to prioritize the most important people. Back at the port, the Navy noticed a strange ship approaching and soon established that it was probably the ship that escaped inspection. They had flags up asking for help, which meant that they had been infected, and even as they got closer, the Kid Scout reported that everyone on board was already dead. Mr. Jean then thought it'll be unwise to bother searching the ship, so he made them prepare to sink the ship and its contaminants. As they prepared their cannons, Old Man Jean remembered how Pharma wanted to save everyone, but they had to skip inspection. He said a prayer for them, after which they shot their shots and didn't miss, unlike you. At an institution, some men complained about how they needed more hands to help out with their work. But when a woman volunteered to help out, they took a glance at her and said no thank you. It turned out she was known as Professor Black Mold and was going to retire soon, so there was no need getting her involved. In her office, her assistant referred to her as Casper, but she cut her shut, adding that not only was she an old crone, her specialty on molds and microorganisms were of no importance to modern medicine. As she resigned herself to being useless, someone came in to summon her to the president's office. Meanwhile, at Estac, Pharma went into the first isolation building, but when he opened the door, the men asked what a kid was doing there. However, another guy stopped their hostility while revealing to Pharma that he was with Salomon a while back, so he knew Pharma was Panichtheos. Once it was established who's the boss, they reported that they couldn't establish who was infected and who wasn't. Pharma then instructed them to administer drugs to everyone present while he examined the patients one after the other. He then used his divine eye to diagnose them one after the other and saw that treatment was possible when the light faded. He told one lucky man all he had was a cold, so he was free to leave the isolation center. He even used his wand to speed up healing, but it was becoming apparent that he couldn't handle the situation himself, even as the contaminated cargo was making its way to the capital. After administering the drugs, they asked Pharma the next line of action, and he told them they should move out and make sure to stop the contaminated cargo heading for the capital. Over at the port, Elen and her team had just finished their inspection rounds, but she still warned her subordinate not to get complacent. Elen thought Pharma handled the situation better and wished she learned more from him, adding that she didn't have any special powers like him. She quickly shut her mouth, but her assistant disagreed by explaining that although Pharma was more accurate, she inspected cargo faster than him. On hearing this, she thanked God she wasn't yet another Sakura. Back at the institute, the president, who happened to be Bruno, asked Casper about her research, but she cut him short, thinking he wanted to cancel the funding for her research. She thanked him for putting up with her for so long and resigned herself to be forced into retirement. However, Bruno stopped her. He said he wasn't firing her, and in fact he had an important job for her to do. She freaked out on hearing that she could potentially save the world, but Bruno calmly handed her a note instructing her to extract a medicinal substance from a microorganism. When she asked what genius wrote the note, Bruno said it was confidential and simply asked if she could handle the task. Fortunately, she revealed she already had one of the organisms cultured in her lab for years, and truly she showed him the sample she thought was useless like her. He then announced that all resources will be poured into producing a new medicine with her in charge, and she promised to try her best. Back at Estac, Pharma explained to the mayor that they couldn't save some of the critically ill patients, but he still thanked Pharma for keeping casualty to the minimum. Pharma added that to be safe, he'd need the cooperation of the villagers, so they had to stay quarantined inside the wall of ice for 2 weeks. Before leaving, he asked them not to touch any animal no matter the case. He also parted ways with the priest and flew on his wand. He didn't travel far before he noticed a fire from afar, so he went down to find the priests he sent ahead burning a cart. The merchants captured didn't want to cooperate at first, but he assured them the Black Death was coming for them, and they had to confess that they had 4 carts with them, and one was loaded with squirrels. They confirmed that the squirrels were shipped from the island wiped out by the epidemic, which further confirmed that the dirtbags were responsible for spreading the plague. They also confessed that they had 24 workers with 5 holy knights, which was pretty suspicious, so the priests asked why they'd be accompanied by nobles. With that information, Pharma concluded that the holy knights intentionally forced the epidemic into the empire. He also recalled how the Empress's infection was speculated to be an intentional act, which meant that there was a mastermind in play. The scum merchant started demanding to be treated like it was their rights. The priest wanted to barbecue them, but Pharma said he'd treat them regardless of their sins. Meanwhile, Bruno reported the news of the outbreak to the Empress and said the rogue crew were probably heading for the capital and would arrive in a day or 2. She then ordered the ministers to strengthen security at the gates when she could just stop the fair. The following day, Lot sold the mask to every merchant she could find and had them purchase using her charms. Meanwhile, Pierre got new samples from the gate which he was to inspect, and one of them had the stain of the Black Death. Just then, an attack broke out from outside the gate, so they had the gate closed immediately. However, the Holy Knights destroyed the gate and began bodying the guards. Despite the danger, Pierre hurried to make sure the dosages in the tent were safe. Once there, Pierre watched as the Holy Knights brought in a cage filled with white squirrels which he unleashed in the capital. He went as far as tossing them around using his wind abilities. On seeing the squirrels, Pierre knew what it meant, so he immediately made the guards sound the alarm to signal that trouble had arrived. As the bell rang, someone reported to the royal hall that Holy Knights from Netherlands had invaded the city. She asked how many, and when he said 5, she sat down asking why they haven't been dealt with. Bruno then suggested they might have come to infect the capital. The Empress wondered why Netherlands would ruin their long-standing alliance only to attack with 5 knights, adding that their ruler just died, so it can't be a national effort. Bruno argued that it had to be someone who had special knowledge about medicine, and even suggested that it might be the work of a brilliant pharmacist they once expelled from the kingdom due to his heretical human experiments. He had to be captured by the Inquisitors and cast out as a commoner after they sealed his divine powers. Bruno added that Camus, before his capture, was experimenting on poisons that could be transferred from person to person. He revealed Camus's name to the Empress while cursing himself for not killing him despite knowing his evil intentions. Meanwhile, the Holy Knights had barricaded themselves with an ice wall to avoid the fire attacks before looking for an opening to spring up on guards successfully. Before they could flee, Solomon showed up to immobilize the rampaging Holy Knights. He then used his divine authority to strip them of their divine powers since they were unworthy. At the same time, Lot was scared to death but wanted to help out. But Cedric made her calm down. Pharma soon arrived, and the first thing he did was stand at the bell tower to check how far the infection had spread using his divine eye. He also saw the white squirrels flying casually to spread the disease, and as he left, he encountered Bruno, so they walked together to the scene where a captured knight was being interrogated. They claimed they had no idea what the Black Death was and simply did as they were told since Camus held their population hostage, ready to kill thousands in a single move. They boldly said he was possessed by an evil spirit, and when Bruno showed up, they gave up the ghost. As they burnt the bodies, Pharma was thinking about producing more drugs when he noticed an ominous figure lurking on top of his pharmacy. Meanwhile, Lot headed to the pharmacy since the alarm stopped ringing, but on arrival, the alarms went off again. As Cedric led her in, he noticed the doors weren't locked, however Lot had already gone upstairs. There, she noticed something weird, so she looked around only to get startled when Cedric walked in. She breathed a sigh of relief, which ended up premature as Camus stabbed Cedric before approaching her. Pharma and Bruno then hurried to the scene to find Lot and Cedric bleeding to death. Immediately, Bruno attacked to draw his attention, but his ice magic did nothing as Camus revealed his hideous face. As they began fighting, Pharma couldn't identify the poison Camus used, so he started guessing as there was no time. Bruno had all his spells blocked and Camus finally attacked with his evil powers. Pharma finally realized it was aconite, but then he realized it was a multiple poison compound. By the time he identified the second poison, Bruno was having his ass handed to him for free. He then took a jar of dangerous chemicals and began giving a speech about how only strong humans had to survive. He was about to test out the chemical, but Pharma eliminated it. At that point, he was visibly pissed and landed a super fast brain-numbing punch on Camus. Seeing his powers, he wanted Pharma to join him to commit a genocide, but Pharma refused and used his right hand to pull a Superman punch. As he yeeted him away, he still followed through with another punch that incapacitated him on the ground, before he used his wand to exorcise the evil spirit in him, which was evident by the rainbow light the wand emitted in the sky. When Solomon saw the light, He knew that the rainbow light meant purification of whatever disease was in the air and land. Meanwhile, Lot and Cedric also gained consciousness, and she went to hug him from behind. After the battle, they treated the few people that caught the infection, while Alen managed to prevent an outbreak from the port. He even had the drug distributed to everyone just in case, but Veron rejected it from Pierre, only to secretly hand it to his wife since he was just a prideful bastard. 2 months later, the Empress officially declared the end of the Black Death pandemic, which meant that the parallel world pharmacy was free to open again. Their first customers were Old Man Jean and Bishop Salomon, along with a bunch of other people. If you watched up to this point, let's confuse the fake fans by commenting RIP Pharma. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.